and welcome to Slate Money, your guide to the business and finance news of the week. I'm Emily Peck, and I'm here with Elizabeth Spiers of the New York Times and Slate.
Hello.
And in for Felix Salmon is the wonderful Anna Szymanski of Reuters. Hey, Anna.
Hello.
You know, it was a real struggle to find news to talk about this week. I don't know. Not much really happened.
Nothing happened.
So, no, today we are going to talk about the election and the Trump trade, how the markets responded to Trump's win. And we will talk about Germany because they're melting down, apparently. Anna's going to fill us in on the situation. And in our final segment, we are going to look at one of the underdog social media sites, or perceived underdog, Reddit, which is having a really good year. So I want to talk about that. If you are a Slate Plus member, we also will have a bonus segment that you can see in your feed. We are going to talk about things that distract us, things that we use to keep us sort of entertained and occupied when we feel like we need to take a break from the news. That's all coming up on Slate Money. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
This episode is brought to you by Global X. Since 2008, Global X ETFs has been committed to empowering investors with unexplored, intelligent solutions. Global X specializes in exchange-traded funds that offer exposure to the artificial intelligence ecosystem, including themes like data centers, robotics, semiconductors, and cloud computing. To learn more about Global X's entire suite of ETFs, from covered calls, fixed income, emerging markets, and more, visit globalxetfs.com.
Last week, we talked about what could happen if Trump won the election. And then, as so happens, this week, Trump won the election. So I guess I don't want to get too much into politics. Slate has a political gab fest. I wanted to talk a little bit about what happened the day after Election Day in the markets, because it seems like the markets, the stock market at least, really was very excited about his win. The day after Election Day, the S&P 500 rose to a new high. I think it was its highest post-election bump it's ever seen. Bank stocks rose. Prison stocks, depressingly, rose on anticipation that Trump would lock up more immigrants and migrants. Energy stocks rose. Bankers in M&A are excited because they think, Lena Khan's on the way out and the era of hipster antitrust that we've been talking about for the past 4 years is probably over. So it's like a new era for deal making. Tesla stock was up. I didn't check it at the time of taping, but, this was a big win for, I have to say his name again, Elon Musk. Small stocks, stocks or smaller companies were up too. And Bitcoin, new highs. So, Anna, is this just normal in a way? Like, is this just the markets were uncertain. They didn't know who was going to win this race. Uncertainty clears. They have an answer. They go up. Should we expect these kinds of gains to continue? Or, what to make of this?
So first, I would say that equity markets are easily excitable. And equity investors, essentially by definition, tend to be optimists. So I think right now what you're seeing is pricing in all of the potential, quote unquote, good things. So the fact that you could get tax cuts, the fact that you could get deregulation. So that's going to be supportive for many industries and also, frankly, especially for smaller companies. So that's why you saw a big spike in the Russell. Now, what's interesting is that what you aren't seeing is what is being priced into the bond market, which is expectations of higher inflation, higher debt, and higher interest rates. And if you look through, it does seem kind of odd that you could get into an environment where, in theory, you're going to have all of these positive things for growth, and somehow that's going to offset the potential of having a much more elevated interest rate than people might currently be pricing in, especially if you've seen what's happened over many years where what the Fed has done has had a much bigger impact on equity markets than almost anything else.
So you're saying while the stock market is excited about growth, the bond market is like, hang on a second, this is going to cost a lot of money. Interest rates are going to be higher. There's going to be inflation. And they're sending a totally different signal.
Yeah, I mean, you saw a little bit of a pullback after the really big moves on Wednesday, both in the dollar and in the bond market. That also partly had to do with the fact that you had a Fed meeting where the Fed did cut as anticipated. But yes, overall, I would say that the bond market is definitely sending a different message. And the equity market, I think, is just kind of going la, 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 and only looking at what the potential positives could be. That's a technical term.
Conventional wisdom is that the bond markets are a little bit more sophisticated than equity markets. And it kind of tracks the dialogue, I think, that's happening around Trump's proposed economic policies. I find that a lot of people really still don't understand how tariffs work. And a lot of what the bond market is pricing in is the potential inflationary effects of tariffs in particular. And whenever I look at people who are very excited about a Trump term because they do believe that it's going to help them economically, I see particularly Trump supporters I know saying, well, this is great because we're going to make all these foreign companies pay these higher prices. And this will just strengthen the economy. And they sort of don't understand the basic fact that, tariffs get passed on to consumers. They can hurt American manufacturing when you're having to import raw materials or pieces from other countries. And so it sort of tracks the relative level of sophistication between the bond markets and the stock markets. I think the stock markets are more reflective of what consumers think is going to happen for the most part versus what I think sophisticated financial investors do.
The stock market is not the economy. The stock market is excited about things that in the long run may turn out to be pretty terrible. Like bankers are excited because there'll be less regulation, and that might be really good for banking. And you would understand why an index of bank stocks would go up. But in the long term, as we've seen before, when you're lax with banking regulation, bad things happen. I mean, that's sort of part of the story leading up to the great financial crisis. And then like some other things I was pondering, like energy stocks rose, but Trump wants drill, baby, drill. But we saw, last week from the World Bank, a report saying like the US or the world rather, is on pace for a glut of oil. Drill, baby, drill would mean more oil, which would mean lower prices, which would mean the energy stocks going up doesn't quite make sense. It's just this very short-term indicator. Am I missing something, Anna? Am I being too negative? Because
no. Well, I mean, first, I would say, as someone who spent most of my career in credit, I can say that equity investors are clearly dumb. So no, just kidding. But I mean, look, I think if you look at how markets responded in 2016, if you look at how they responded in 2020, these initial moves, especially when you're talking about sector specific, tend to bear very little relation to what actually happens. Energy companies did very well under Biden. So will they do better or worse under Trump? Honestly, it is very hard to say because it certainly is true that like part of the reason that energy companies did well was because Russia invaded Ukraine. So all of a sudden Europe needed lots of natural gas, which they got from the United States. Then of course, if Trump is going to start a trade war and he's going to start putting tariffs on things from Europe, well, then that's going to have an impact. So again, it goes back to this idea of equity markets pricing in anything that might be positive and not necessarily pricing in the negative. Now, to be fair to all of those equity investors out there, I think one of the things you will hear, and I think I mentioned this last week, is that people say the really bad stuff, the stuff that doesn't make any sense, the crazy tariffs, well, that's not actually going to happen. That is simply a negotiating tactic. So while Trump will extend tax cuts, potentially put in additional tax cuts, deregulate, all that bad stuff might not actually happen. And look, you could make that argument. I think I would argue that from what we've seen in the past, Trump has definitely shown that he is willing to put through measures that don't make a tremendous amount of economic sense. I also think it's interesting to think about, okay, if it is a negotiating tactic, who are you doing this with? Well, mostly China, Europe, neither of which is in an amazing position right now to make any concessions. So that's also the question. Even if they did want to make a concession so they don't get the tariffs, okay, what exactly are they supposed to do? So I would argue that the equity market is definitely pricing in a much more optimistic scenario than is likely to play out, but you never know.
Yeah, I think also the speculative players in the equity markets think of these possibilities when they're assessing risk as much more of a binary, like this will happen or this won't happen. And if we understand anything from the first Trump term, it's that in a lot of cases, he'll try to implement something that's just not logistically feasible. And you'll get this kind of like halfway thing, which is what I think is going to happen with tariffs. And I don't think the administration or any of the people that Trump is pulling in are going to be markedly more competent at execution than they were the last time. So what I think will end up happening is a lot of these things will get executed, but in a way that's kind of clunky and they're half measures. And I think the equity markets are more likely to look at things like that as a binary, like it will happen or it won't happen in its totality. And I think the people who are really pricing in the risk of it think of it more like, what's the probability that some of this happens? And what do we think the risk is?
It's interesting because there are some things that the Trump administration would have to do to make a big market or economic impact. Like they are going to have to put in place these huge tariffs. And we should talk about the tariffs, I guess, because they keep coming up. I feel like we just need to drill in there. But before we do, so they have to take some kind of action to put the tariffs in place. But there are things that are sort of like negative actions that companies are really psyched about, like pulling back on these antitrust actions, right? That Cantor at the DOJ and Khan at the FTC have done. They can just walk away from a lot of this litigation, let a lot of these deals go through. It's like they don't actually have to do anything. And that just seems like Republican administration 101 stuff, or installing anti-labor people over at the National Labor Relations Board, or just like pulling back on a lot of the regulations and actions that the Biden administration took. I know people say we don't know what Trump is going to do, but that just seems like any generic Republican would do any of that stuff coming in.
I do think, though, that it is possible that one of the things that will limit what Trump will end up doing could be the markets themselves. Kind of mentioned this a bit last week, but number one, if he's engaging in policies that have a dramatically negative impact on the stock market, he's likely to react. The other thing is what we saw in this election is that people really, really hate inflation. And so if he starts engaging in policies that start pushing up inflation, he may also start to kind of think that through. The other thing I think is interesting is when people talk about deal activity. So yes, it is true that right now there's a lot of excitement about, okay, we're going to see this increase in deal activity. However, if interest rates are not coming down, if the cost of capital is a lot higher and the economics of those deals don't make sense, that's going to continue to weigh on deal flow, even if you don't have regulatory issues holding it down. The regulations are not what's restricted deal flow in the last 2 years. It's been interest rates.
No, that's not true. I think the FTC and the DOJ have filed suit to stop deals from going through, and successfully in many cases. They have slowed down the deal flow.
But the reason that you've seen a dramatic decrease, yes, there have been certain deals that haven't gone through because I'm not saying that has had no impact, but that has not been the number one reason.
Yeah, but I mean, interest rates are coming down. I mean, as we're speaking on Friday, the Federal Reserve cut short-term rates by 1/4 point on Thursday. Long-term interest rates had been going up ahead of the election, but we're already seeing them sort of like come back down a little bit. So it's really unclear, the path ahead.
Well, the thing is, if he, we go back to tariffs, if he does implement some of this stuff, they're going to be inflationary, most likely. I think one underestimated thing that might constrain him a little bit on that front is his own Republican Congress, because tariffs don't just affect consumers directly in terms of what they're paying. They also affect American businesses that need to import things in order to operate. And I think there are a lot of Republican people in Congress who have zero incentive to support tariffs. There's only so much that Trump can do by himself. And he really has to build a coalition for the kind of aggressive tariffs that he's saying he wants to implement. And I'm not sure he has it.
Well, it's interesting, the National Retail Federation, not exactly a very progressive group. I think we could all agree. The trade association that represents retailers that put out like a report the day before the election looking at how Trump's proposed tariffs increases would affect clothing, furniture, household appliances, the prices. And it was like, it's nothing we didn't really know already, but it was just kind of stark to see the numbers. So basically what a tariff is when you're importing goods into the US will levy a tax and the importer pays it. So if like Home Depot is importing washing machines from South Korea or something, and it wants them to come in the country, it pays this tax, and then it charges, however much it's going to charge for the washing machine. And to recoup the tax it paid, the cost of importing the the product. And the NRF report, it was like a $100 sweater would be like $140. The cost of toys would rise, they estimated, by as much as 56%, because 99% of the toys that we buy in the United States are imported, which is kind of wild.
So Trump is just going to piss off the next generation with that. All the 9-year-olds.
Yeah, but then I was thinking about it a bit more, and it's like, because we import so much stuff from China, everything is so cheap. Like, go to Walmart or Target. Like, it's really, I just, this whole interview about Victoria's Secret that you'll hear on Money Talks, and it was about the way retail has changed over the past 30 years. And one item they talked about was this really popular sweater sold by the Limited in the 80s called the Firenze sweater. It was, at the time, considered a cheap sweater, and it was $30 in 1985. That now is just like a regular price. My point is just that the stuff we import is really cheap already, and I'm curious if consumers will actually notice price increases in that stuff as much as progressives and critics of the tariffs are thinking. I'm wondering if, even if they're a little bit inflationary, people might not actually notice, especially because in our heads, we just went through this period of really high inflation. And I just wonder, maybe the tariffs won't be that impactful the way people are, or critics are saying.
I think they will, particularly because they affect groceries. And around 70% of our imported produce comes from Mexico. And now Trump is saying he wants 100% tariffs on Mexico if they don't build the wall. And that's not going to happen. But he will put some tariffs on Mexico. And people just really don't realize how much of the food supply chain is international, how much we don't grow here. And then if you deport a lot of workers in the agricultural sector, that is going to affect groceries. And I do think consumers will absolutely notice that, because they already do.
I would say that it is definitely true that we don't actually know what the inflationary impact will be, because we're just horrible at actually forecasting inflation. So it is impossible to say 100%.
Yes.
Because you don't know what the actual impacts will be. Like, if somebody does something and then does that stimulate something else, and does someone react? Nobody actually knows. However, if a lot of these policies are put through, it seems inevitable that they're going to have reactions in terms of other countries, and they're going to do things, and that is going to negatively impact potentially growth. That could also push up prices in other ways. So we don't know. It's possible everything will work out perfectly fine. It's also possible things won't. But even if you have just a bit of inflation, again, I'm going to go back to my hobby horse here, because as I've always said, the Fed is the most important thing in the world. But if you're having inflation just up by a percentage point or two, the Fed cares about that. It cares about that more than anything else. So that, again, means that interest rates are going to have to remain more elevated. And I think when people think about interest rates and whether they're going up or down, the point is not whether they're going 25 basis points here or 25 basis points there. It's the terminal rate. It's where they end up, where they land, and the signaling about what's going to happen with them. And if you look at mortgage rates have spiked because of what we've seen. These things have demonstrable impacts on the real economy.
Yeah, another wild card is that we don't really know how Trump is going to interact with the Fed. He's been making noise about trying to constrain its ability to, frankly, do its job. I'm not sure he'll get very far with that either. But let's say that he does interfere, or he changes the way that economic data is calculated. He's done that before with census data. We may have more uncertainty simply because we don't really know the condition of the economy. And the Fed is a little bit constrained in terms of the extent to which they can deal with it, especially if he doesn't like the results.
Yeah. There's a lot of unknowns here. I'm sure we'll be talking about this again and again and again and again for the next 4 years. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/credit card. Buy low, sell high. It's a simple concept, but not necessarily an easy one. Right now, high interest rates have crushed the real estate market. Prices are falling, and properties are available at a discount, which means Fundrise believes now is the time to expand the Fundrise Flagship Fund's $1 billion real estate portfolio. Fun fact, you guys, I used to work at Fundrise. I know those guys. They're good guys over there. You can add the Fundrise flagship fund to your portfolio in minutes by visiting fundrise.com/money. That's fundrise.com/money. Carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the Fundrise flagship fund before investing. This and other information can be found in the fund's prospectus at fundrise.com/flagship. This is a paid advertisement. Let's talk about another country that is going through some upheaval. Anna, I'm just going to have you explain what's happening in Germany.
Our European correspondent is Anna.
Yes.
She's based in London.
Yes.
Well, not actually Europe, unfortunately, but close enough.
Wait, it is Europe. I mean,
But
it's not the
because
EU.
of Brexit, they're not EU.
Because of Brexit, let me tell you, look where the pound was before Brexit. Look where the pound is now. I am no longer in Europe. But it is sad, honestly. So the coalition government in Germany collapsed this week because Olaf Scholz, chancellor, fired his finance minister, who is a member of a different party, essentially kind of more conservative, a neoliberal, for want of a better term, party. And the main reason that he sacked him was because he was blocking the moves to be able to take on more debt in order to be able to support Ukraine, as well as the German economy, which, as stated in previous episodes, is really struggling. So this honestly could be seen as both a good or a bad thing. I think in the short term, obviously, it seems like, you've had a lot of political chaos in France. You're having a lot of political chaos in Germany. This is bad. It is. However, this was such an unstable coalition that this was going to happen eventually. I think the Trump election, honestly, may have spurred it slightly, but it was going to happen eventually. So I think the idea now is that if you can get snap elections sooner rather than later, right now, the opposition parties are really aiming to have snap elections very, very soon. Then maybe you could actually get a coalition in there that actually could pass measures so that Germany could take actions to support its economy in advance of whatever Trump might do. Also, frankly, just because the economy is really, really struggling.
So what are people anticipating that they would do, especially, around the issues of high costs and Asian competition?
Honestly, it's an excellent question because there is no good answer to it. They will, I'm sure that if I believe the current government has a 49-point plan, I'm like, why didn't you just add another point, make it 50? But like a 49-point plan.
Too many points.
It's a lot of points. It's a lot of points.
It's too many.
50 is just prey.
I mean, but you just need 3 points. That's it. Politicians are so bad at marketing.
It is a very fair point. I mean, I think there's some discussion about trying to cap energy costs for businesses to try to support manufacturing and potentially some longer term issues. There's a lot of things that in theory they could do, but the reality is that Germany's just in a really real pickle.
Can you explain the pickle?
Yes. I would say the two biggest parts of said pickle are that Germany benefited from cheap energy from Russia, and it benefited from strong demand, especially for its autos and advanced manufacturing parts from China. Both of those things have gone away. The cheap energy has definitely gone away, and then demand from China has dramatically decreased. And on top of that, China has become so much more competitive in terms of autos, especially in terms of EVs. So Germany is right now in a position where they've been an export-driven economy for so long that is really struggling. On top of that, another issue that Germany has had is that it has long been very averse to taking on any debt and spending. And part of what that's meant is that they haven't invested in their infrastructure. They haven't invested in their population. So they have issues about shortages of workers in the industries where they need them. Parts of their infrastructure is falling apart. Like they have a lot of real serious issues. And it's almost ironic because you obviously had Germany for so many years kind of wagging their finger at all the other European countries being like, oh, you're taking on so much debt and you're spending too much. And we Germans are, examples of fiscal probity and blah, blah. Well, it turns out that there's probably a happy medium between, being a spendthrift and not spending at all. And Germany is now finding that out. And they're finding it out at the worst possible time.
Do you think that's really going to change their very long-running culture of austerity, though? Or will they just put a Band-Aid on it?
It's a really good question. Honestly, maybe if Trump actually goes through with some of the things that he says he's going to do and it makes things really, really bad, that almost forces them to do what they don't want to do, in the same sense that during the pandemic, they were forced to do things they didn't want to do. And also to go to step back, another issue you'll hear when you hear all these discussions about Germany is this debt break. So they actually have basically an amendment that says they can only have borrowing that's a certain percentage of GDP. And it's quite low. And this debt brake can only be suspended if there's some type of crisis. So this is another issue that they've had in terms of trying to do anything to stimulate their economy. It's just that they have all of these things in place that just make it really, really hard.
And I think it should be noted or emphasized, the US is the largest buyer of German products. That makes the tariff conversation extremely relevant because if tariffs go up, that's going to hurt all these German manufacturers, particularly the auto companies that are already under pressure from China. At the same time, Germany imports from the rest of the EU. And if things are still not going very well, that's bad for all of Europe. So it plays this sort of very important role, right, Anne? It's like the powerhouse of Europe or something, or it used to be considered as such.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny because Germany used to be the sick man of Europe. Then it became the engine of growth of Europe. Now it kind of seems to be relatively sick again. And the other thing is that any tariffs that are on China are also going to then again impact Germany, more so even than the rest of the EU. So
how? What do you mean?
Well, just because more of Germany's goods go to China than the rest of the EU. So anything that happens with China is going to have a bigger impact on Germany than the rest of the bloc. I mean, that's part of the reason why right now, if you look at different European economies, not all of them are doing badly. Germany's doing a lot worse than most of the others. And that is in large part because of how closely tied it is to China. Now, of course, it all eventually seeps through to the rest of Europe. If the engine of growth for Europe for so long, for multiple years, is not growing, that's going to have an impact on the rest of the region. The other thing I will say, part of the reason you're having this political instability is because as people see their standard of living declining, they are less apt to support the traditional parties. And you're seeing the growth of the far right and the far left. And the concern is that if the economy continues to struggle, you're going to see more and more of that. And then that makes instability even more likely. So yes, that's why these things like it's not just on a potential like boring economic level, on like a very real level. Like this should be concerning. Now, again, the hope is that you will get a better, more stable coalition of reasonable people. Those reasonable people will be able to put through policies that can actually support the economy. I'll be perfectly honest, I am not optimistic because I actually don't know what blueprint you can possibly follow, especially given the political realities of Germany, that will actually get you where you need to go.
One last thing I wanted to note. In one of the articles, Anna was kind enough to share with us, our European correspondent was kind enough to share with us prior to taping. One of the pieces mentioned that Germans are now saving 11% of their income. 11%. That's, I think, at least twice as much as Americans save. And that's a big chunky number that cannot be good for their economy.
No, I mean, to be fair, the U.S. tends to have a relatively low savings rate, except during the pandemic when it spiked. But yes, no, and it is. Again, that's one of the issues too, because domestic consumption declines and not good for the economy.
Yeah, the U.S., one of the reasons our economy is always chugging along is because we love to spend money.
It's true.
We love to spend the money.
And then during emergencies, we hoard cash and toilet paper. So.
Yes. I never run out of toilet paper. I just want to note that. This episode is brought to you by GiveWell. You like to optimize things. You've chosen the perfect credit card to maximize your travel points, and you always find the fastest route when you drive. Shouldn't you handle your charitable giving the same way? GiveWell spends 50,000 hours every year doing deep dives into different charitable programs to help you do the most good for your dollar. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed choices about high-impact giving. All of their research and recommendations is available on their site for free, and you can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. Give to givewell.org to find out more or make a donation. Select podcast and enter Slate Money at checkout to make sure they know you heard about them from us. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more.
This episode of Slate Money is brought to you by Lumen. You have a unique metabolism. Your metabolism is basically the engine of your body. And so optimizing your metabolic health translates to easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, and better sleep. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. It's very clever. It's this little black device. You breathe in through it for 4 seconds, you hold your breath for 10 seconds, and then you breathe out through it for 6 seconds. And this breathe in, breathe out thing gives Lumen all of the information it needs to know all about how much fat you're burning, how many carbs you're burning, and it will give you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. For instance, when I woke up in the morning, Lumen told me that I should have a low carb day because, I put on a bit of weight recently. And so they're like, look, we know how many carbs you're burning, how much fat you're burning. You're not really burning a lot of carbs right now, so eat fewer carbs. It will also allow you to track what you're eating. You just take a photograph of what you're eating and it automatically knows whether it's carbs, whether it's protein. It's very clever, this thing. If you just breathe into Lumen before and after your workouts and your meals, you'll know exactly what's going on in your body in real time, and it will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. So take the next step in improving your health. Go to lumen.me/slate money to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/slate money for 15% off your purchase.
Let's talk about Reddit. People either love it and use it all the time, or at least they know about it because one of Reddit's subreddits, Am I the Asshole, is a huge content provider to all the other social media websites on the internet. And that's where people tell a story from their lives and they're like, hey, was I the jerk here or was it someone else? And that's been talked about a lot in a lot of places. But the reason I wanted to talk about Reddit, or the excuse I bring to you two to talk about Reddit, is that it's doing really well. Revenue on the site rose 68% in the third quarter. The stock is up. The stock is trading now, I think, 3 times its IPO price. It just IPO'd last year and it went through some hard times. I know I did a Slate What Next TBD episode all about Reddit, and it was selling its data for AI purposes, and some of its users revolted, but that seems to have calmed down now. And now Reddit has inked this deal with Google, which has made it easier. So now when you search on Google, you are more apt to get a Reddit page in your results, which I've definitely noticed as a Google user. And I posit that Reddit is maybe the best social media platform we have right now. When I was preparing for this conversation, I went over there and I was just kind of looking around. You can get really lost in these Reddit threads if there's a particular TV show you're watching or a book. Sometimes I read a book and after I'm done, I'm really into it. I read a few reviews and it's not enough. And then you go over to Reddit and you'll find just hundreds of comments, dissecting and analyzing the book. I mean, it's just a really fun, searchable website. And I'm feeling bullish about it right now. I don't know, Elizabeth, how are you feeling about Reddit?
Yeah, well, as the most internet poisoned of all of us, I love Reddit. And, it's been around for a long time. So there are certain things that I think they have a handle on that some of the other social media platforms have either not proceeded as far along with or they've rolled back. And one big one is human moderation. So the quality of information there is higher than, if you go to X right now, it's sort of a mess. But also they've built these communities over the course of now probably almost 2 decades. So there's just a lot of embedded knowledge there that's now organized over time that sort of makes it useful for people who are on the site. But the reason why it's doing well business-wise is that, first of all, it had an IPO, and I think that's made people look a little bit more closely at it. But there's the deal with Google. There's also the fact that they've used machine translation to translate posts in different markets. So right now, maybe half of Reddit's users are outside of the US. They've gotten to be much bigger in France. And of course, this gives people an opportunity to sell more ad inventory. And that's been huge for them. I think way more so than, for instance, selling data to AI companies.
Anna, are you as familiar with Reddit as we are, or more familiar? What's your experience here?
So I was thinking about it. And for the most part, I would say I'm not a heavy Reddit user, but I will say, actually, when I was getting ready to move, it was extremely useful for really random things for one moving to a different country, like how to save your US phone number while not having a US phone provider. Turns out there's a way to do it. Reddit taught me how to do it. Figuring out which electronics you actually can use overseas and not start a fire. Reddit has shown me the right way here. So I think that just speaks to the fact that that probably is a way that Reddit is actually quite good for these weird nichey things that actual humans have done. And I do agree with you. It does seem like whoever is doing the moderating is actually doing a reasonably good job of it.
And I feel like the search thing cannot be overstated enough because so recently I was on Instagram Reels and I saw this amazing clip of Bo and Yang on the Las Culturistas podcast talking about how it's impossible to just buy 1 to 2 carrots at the supermarket and you have to buy a whole bunch of carrots. And if you're a single guy, he goes on this whole rant. It's so good. Maybe we could even play a clip, but he's like, I don't want to make 6 stews with my carrots. I only want 1 stew. And and he just like goes on this whole rant.
I don't think so, honey. The current state of vegetables and produce at the grocery stores of America. Sometimes I don't need 7 carrots. I'm making 1 stew, not 7 stews. The recipe calls for 1 carrot. Now I'm supposed to come up with other recipes that are carrot forward for the rest of my week? Who do you think I am? I'm a single, childless, gay man. I'm cooking for one and I like it that way.
I wanted to show it to someone who had been complaining about something similar. And I went back to Instagram and I was like, Bo and Yang carrots, Bo and Yang stew rant, Bo and Yang, I don't think so, honey, carrot stew rant. I could not find it. I went to Google, nothing. Like, it is so hard to find anything on these social media platforms. Like they're like these ephemeral, crazy things that come in and out of your brain. I don't know. It's Elizabeth, I feel like you're crazy, but I find it really hard to sort of find anything and go back to it. And the fact that you can now like search Google and get Reddit results and find answers to questions like, can I keep my US phone number? Or was the ending of that book as bad as I thought it was? I think is like really important. And it feels like the old internet is still alive a little bit.
It has that element of community around it because the reason why the moderation is so good is that each niche community has its own moderators. And those people are heavily invested in moderating their forums because they're participants and they care about them. And, each forum has its own set of rules. If you go to like a weightlifting forum or something, there's usually in the right side of the page, a document or a page that says, here are the rules of this specific community. But when you have these sort of tightly orchestrated internet communities like this, they sort of tend toward self-organization over time, unless you have somebody like Elon Musk who comes in and says, fuck all this moderation stuff. I'm going to just dispense with all the rules and we'll start over. So it's a little bit more robust. But also you have people there who are kind of recurring posters who have developed some level of expertise. There are niche communities where literal experts participate in. And so you can go into Reddit and find like a body of information around a topic that you can also just sort of browse. And it's very difficult to do that on any other social platform. Like maybe Facebook groups comes close, but it's just not the user experience is totally different. So
yeah, it's useful. It's actually useful. And it's not, well, I'm sure it is, but it doesn't seem as algorithmically For You page chaotic. Like you can actually go and look for information that you want and find it, as opposed to having like a bunch of stuff thrown at you that's like endlessly distracting and like gets your pulse moving higher, but doesn't in the end solve any questions. And after an hour, you're like, what just happened?
But also Reddit's not just there for utility. Some people find community there, but to go back to Am I the Asshole, which is super popular Reddit, where people are like, I decided to kick my 10-year-old out of the house because she didn't clean up her room. Am I the asshole? And then 4 million people go in and say, yes. Yeah, I'm calling CPS. Farhad Manjoo writes a column at Slate about Reddit. It's called r/Farhad. And his column is mostly about the sort of human pathos that you see on Reddit, because you have people talking about their real lives and their real problems in depth. And I also use it in that way for a specific purpose. I'm working on a novel that has a little plot line about the manosphere. So I have a sort of lurker account that's signed into all of these Reddit boards around this stuff. And it's just fascinating to watch how people talk to each other on these boards because, most people are anonymous on Reddit for the most part. But there are rules and norms about how you're supposed to behave when you're there, and they do get enforced. So it's just, you get a glimpse into parts of humanity that you probably would not normally encounter.
Elizabeth, you've been visiting the manosphere. Please become our manosphere correspondent right now and give us some examples of the behavior you see moderated or not moderated in said manosphere.
Okay, so on some manosphere boards, predictably, a lot of them have a lot of, misogyny built in. But there are some boards that sort of frame whatever they're doing in the context of, say, self-help. And I think those boards are more likely to have a moderator who restricts it if it just goes into woman-bashing territory.
Oh, dear.
Or if people are being racist. It really depends on the sort of micro community. And you see the participants in the board. If somebody's behaving badly, they vote them down or they get them booted out. So it's a lot of community moderation too. And I think that makes a difference.
Have we been too kind to Reddit? Are there things to say?
Oh, no, it's also responsible for radicalizing right-wing people who want to storm the Capitol. It's a site for that, partly because the community building aspect is so effective. I would say like Reddit and Telegram are probably two of the bigger sources of that. But if you look at how broad Reddit is, you're always going to have some corner of any large social network that's just a total cesspool. There's also a lot of porn on Reddit that I think is not as moderated as it is on social networks like Threads or Facebook. And just because it's, their moderation is less algorithmically driven to some extent, so they don't catch as much of it. And also they just don't have a model where if they do have porn on the site and it's not crossing any illegal lines, they sort of don't care. They just don't sell ads against it.
I'm now remembering that Reddit users kind of helped chase Ellen Pao out from her CEO role when she was briefly the chief executive officer of Reddit. So that seems not what you want. So it's not perfect. When you think about businesses growing their sales beyond forecasts, you think about a product with demand, a focused brand, influence-driven marketing. But the often overlooked secret is the businesses behind the business making selling simple. For millions, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret? Shopify with Shop Pay can boost conversions by up to 50%. Meaning way fewer carts going abandoned and more sales. So if you're growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/money. Go to shopify.com/money to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/money. Do you guys have numbers? Anna, you go. You go, girl.
So my number is roughly 13,000. So there were roughly 13,000 votes in Nevada that could not be confirmed because mostly Gen Z voters do not know how to write their own signature. This is apparently a true story. People either...
This is a theme.
Okay,
a Slate Money theme.
I have a bone to pick with this story, but go on.
So I guess people were writing block letters or their signature just didn't match what they had done originally or anyway. So it was just one of these stories of kids these days, they can't write their own signature.
Yeah, it's a technology problem because in a lot of states, voter registration has to happen on paper. So you sign your signature on paper. And then now, especially in this cycle, we've had more people confirming signatures on tablets. And I don't know anybody who can replicate their on-paper signature perfectly on a tablet. And my on-paper signature is kind of messy to begin with, but my tablet signature is just like if you gave an elephant a crayon. It's not, it doesn't remotely resemble my in-person. So I think that's part of it. Also, kids don't learn cursive anymore. And to some extent, they're allowed to use block letters and stuff. My kid actually makes his lowercase a's like a font. He uses one that has a curly tail and then a smaller circle below it. So, and he only knows that from seeing typography, but that's the way he writes. So
I have to say, when I went to vote and they asked me to sign, and then they checked, to match my signature from whenever it was I registered 1,000 years ago. First of all, I still vote under my I hate this word, under my maiden name.
Yeah.
I don't sign that name anymore, ever. I don't remember how I used to do it. So I just winged it. And I was like, God, I hope it matches. And then they like allegedly were looking to see if it matched and said it did. There's no way
Also,
it matched.
signature match is the worst security.
We've discussed this.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's useless.
It's useless.
I completely agree with you. But I think the issue with the youngins is that it wasn't just that their signature didn't match, it was that they were doing block letters. It's like, it wasn't even a signature. I feel like if you have a scribble and a scribble, people are like, oh yeah, it looks the same.
Well, they never have to write. They're always on computers.
All right. Elizabeth.
Okay, my number is 100,000. My stat is that the average Burning Man attendee is an American white male who makes more than $100,000 annually. And I learned this yesterday from a Modern Love column, the title of which was Men, Please Stop Talking About Burning Man. Because the author keeps going on dates where this becomes the topic of conversation. And at least according to this piece, there's a sort of self-righteous tone that comes with it. The people that Burning Man burners believe that they're like core principles to going to Burning Man. They believe that they're being, environmentally good because they leave the desert the way that they found it, although there are plenty of indigenous people who live around there who say they definitely do not, and that it's generally, a very socially conscious, environmentally friendly festival, even though people take private planes to get there and so on. So her thing was like, I don't want to date any more burners. I just don't. And so she said, there's a trend now on Hinge and Tinder where people will just write no burners.
What is burning? Is it like Davos, but for like rich hippies in America? Like, is there music there? Like,
Yes.
What even is it?
It started out as like an art festival, and now it's like there's music, but it's not. It's sort of decentralized in a lot of ways. These groups will apply to have their own sort of functions, and it might be like performance art or some giant sculpture or whatever. And then the rest of it, I get the sense is just a lot of drugs and orgies and riding bikes around the desert. So
okay,
yes,
all right.
I will say,
cool.
So my boyfriend goes to Burning Man every year. He also 100% fits everything that you said. So I also mock him every year when he goes to Burning Man. So but I say like, it's his joy. Like it brings him so much joy to go to this thing. So I'm like, it's ridiculous to me. He wears strange things when he goes there. He tells me funny stories. He acknowledges that part of it is completely ridiculous, but it brings him joy. So,
but we shouldn't yuck their yum, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, maybe the issue is these guys are talking too much about themselves on these dates. What you want to do is ask questions.
Yeah, that's what I suspect. That's what it sounded like in the column.
Okay. Wow, those were good numbers. My number is 97 inches. That is the size now of these mega televisions that are becoming really popular ahead of the holiday season. So 97 inches is like a little more than 8 feet diagonal. So that's like really big. These are massive TVs. They have come down in price a lot over just the past 4 years. In 2019, you could get one for $99,000, and now they're like $4,000, and they're becoming really popular. And I don't have much else to say about it except people like really big TVs. And I guess this is happening now. And I guess if you watch football on Sundays and you have Sunday ticket, it makes a lot of sense. But for other people, I'm not sure it does make sense.
We have a projector. I feel like at some point, if you want a TV that needs to get bigger for some reason, that's the like cheaper way to do it.
But this AP piece I read, they said that the TVs the big ones now are getting so much better. They're kind of becoming better than the projectors. But I don't know if the reporter was just conned by big TV.
Possibly.
Question, did you say it went down to $4,000?
Yeah, I saw $4,000.
Because can you just imagine if you were the person who spent like $90,000 on it and then like 5 years later you could have bought it for $4,000?
I know. Well, that's what I'm saying about the tariffs. Right? Because for the tariff's going to make the $4,000 TV $5,000. Look, I tried. And that's it for our show today. If you have thoughts or comments, TV preferences, send them to slatemoney@slate.com. If you want to listen to more Slate Money, you should check your feed because we have a bonus segment just for Slate Plus listeners. We're going to talk about all the things that we're using to distract us from the news and from real life right now. So if you're a Slate Plus member, you should go check that out. If you're not a Slate Plus member, you should really subscribe to Slate Plus. Thanks to Cheyna Roth and Jesssamine Molli and the crew at Seaplane Armada for producing. Thanks to Elizabeth and Anna for making me laugh and for all their smart insights, of course. And thanks to you for listening. We'll see you back here next week on Slate Money.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Terms and conditions apply.